When you think of superheroes, chances are it won't take long before your mind automatically goes to Superman. Yes, the last son of Krypton has had a difficult and often strained relationship with the big screen, from the insult that was Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, to the will they, won't they storyline surrounding Henry Cavill's future in the DCEU. For everything that Supes has brought to the big screen over the years, however, there have been some seriously tantalizing projects that never saw the light of day. But when you look at some of the Superman movies that did see the light of day, you have to question how these didn't. With that in mind, I'm Adam from What Culture, and here are 10 true stories of the best Superman movies never made. Number 10. Superman 5. It's a tale as old as time that a popular movie franchise eventually outstays its welcome, though today his on-screen career has seen a mixed reception to say the least. Superman the movie in 1978 was a beloved flick that still stands up today. 3 sequels later, however, the same thing can't be said. Superman 4: The Quest for Peace is one of the most unpopular comic book movies of all time, and it makes sense that this was where the franchise ended. This almost wasn't the case, however, as there were plans for a Superman 5 at one time. Even after a 4th installment in the franchise that Christopher Reeve was vocally unhappy with, there were talks to bring the actor back as Clark Kent. The script was written by former franchise producer Ilya Salkind and would have seen the Man of Steel die and reborn again, before capping off his time as the hero with a proposal to Lois Lane. Reportedly, Reeve was in discussions to return to the role that had defined so much of his career. But unfortunately, the project never really got off the ground. Superman 5 was ultimately never made, allowing no redemption for Superman 4's mistakes. Number 9. Kevin Smith's Superman Lives. Kevin Smith is one of those people that is synonymous with comic books and their entire culture. He embraces the role of being a nerd, and with projects like Mallrats, Clerks, and Jay and Silent Bob under his belt, he has become an incredibly popular figure. Coming off the back of his success with Mallrats, Smith was so offended by Gregory Poirier's Superman Reborn script, he began his own rewrite that would become Superman Lives. Years before the actor took up the cowl of Batman, if this idea ever came into fruition, it would have been Ben Affleck as the Man of Steel. Smith was writing his Superman part specifically for his Mallrats colleague, in a story that would have taken inspiration from the classic Death of Superman arc. Once in development, however, things infamously broke down between Smith and producer John Peters, largely over casting. While Smith was dead set on Ben Affleck, the studio wanted to cast Sean Penn, in what would have been a darker version of the character, not too dissimilar to how Zack Snyder brought the Man of Steel to life. While this style certainly has its fans, it has largely divided the fandom since the DCEU's inception, and it's hard to imagine Smith's passion for the character wouldn't have brought something far more enjoyable to the table. Number 8. Tim Burton's Superman Lives. In the midst of production nightmares, with Warner Bros. Looking to change just too much about Smith's movie, the legendary producer left the project. After being offered to multiple directors, Tim Burton was eventually hired to helm the movie after his work on Batman. There were 2 major decisions made that would ultimately ensure that there was nothing left of Kevin Smith's vision for the project. The first was the casting of Nicolas Cage in the titular role, not even close to the actor the part had been specifically written for, and the second was Tim Burton ordering a complete rewrite of the script by writer Wesley Strick. There were further rewrites still, this time by Dan Gilroy, who penned The Bourne Legacy and Kong Skull Island many years later, before the whole thing ultimately fell apart. Concerns over the script and the budget, particularly at a time when Warner Bros. Had seen some disappointments at the box office, were what led to the movie's cancellation. Reports are unclear as to how final the news of the movie's halt in production was, but Tim Burton moved on to direct Sleepy Hollow with Christopher Walken. Ironically, the man once touted to play Brainiac in the film, and Cage left live-action Superman behind completely. This was the final curtain on one of the more bizarre developmental hells in Hollywood memory. Number 7. A cameo in Gotham. After the Superman franchise fizzled out with the ill-advised Superman 4: The Quest for Peace in 1987, Batman's Hollywood star was just about to rise. The Dark Knight's 1989 outing would soon go on to change the entire comic book movie landscape, and Christopher Reeve had the idea to bring the Man of Steel along for the ride. This would have been little more than a cameo in Tim Burton's movie, something that may be commonplace in the shared universe-heavy Hollywood culture today, but would have been mind-blowing over 30 years ago. The idea was simply that Batman needed some assistance fighting crime on the streets of Gotham, and though Superman wouldn't have stayed around for very long, a scene shared between Reeve and Keaton would have acknowledged that both lived in the same universe. Tonally, Reeves' Superman just wouldn't have fit in with Burton and Keaton's version of Batman in Gotham, but this would have been a fun moment that could have genuinely opened up so many opportunities not only for Warner Bros. And DC, but for the entire comic book movie industry. Number 6. A Green Lantern tie-in. On paper, bringing Batman together on screen with Superman should have been an iconic moment, and a license to print money for Warner Bros. In the way that the Avengers was for Marvel Studios. Unfortunately, however, the studio somehow fumbled the first on-screen meeting between arguably the two most popular superheroes of all time. Could the Man of Steel had more success had he crossed paths with a different DC character instead? The DC universe is a big place, and Batman isn't the only character with ties to Superman. What about the Green Lantern? And no. Not the Ryan Reynolds version. Details are scarce on this project, with the majority of the information coming from the Twitter account of Mission Impossible Fallout director Christopher McQuarrie. There had been rumors that McQuarrie had been involved with the development of a Green Lantern movie, but things actually ran deeper than this. The movie would have been tied into a Man of Steel 2 pitch that he and Henry Cavill were working on together, seemingly picking up after the Green Lantern Corps were teased in Justice League, though there were no takers for the pitch. Even with this little information, it seems as though McQuarrie and Cavill were putting more thought into building a shared universe than Warner Bros. Ever did. Number 5. Matthew Vaughn's trilogy. 2008 was a big year in terms of comic book movies. Hellboy 2: The Golden Army released, but was dwarfed in terms of importance and quality by two of the biggest comic book movies in history, The Dark Knight, arguably one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, and Iron Man, kicking off the Marvel Cinematic Universe and changing the game forever. This was also the time in which Matthew Vaughn was looking to enter the world of Superman. The director is best known for the likes of Kick-Ass, X-Men First Class, and Kingsman: The Secret Service, all wonderful movies based on the pages of comic books. But before any of them were ever released, the director was planning a Superman trilogy with frequent collaborator Mark Miller. The first of the movies would have focused more on Jor-El and the destruction of Krypton, and would have made a huge change to the lore of Superman, which could have potentially been the difference between its success and its failure. In this story, the cataclysmic end of Kal-El's home would have taken place many years later than traditional, allowing the hero to grow up on his home planet and slowly get to know Earth from afar. A different and potentially controversial take on the Man of Steel, but Miller's philosophy that you have to feel good coming out of a Superman movie makes this feel like a missed opportunity. Number 4. Superman Flyby. Even in spite of the whole-scale changes being made to DC on the big screen thanks to James Gunn and Peter Safran, by all reports, the J.J. Abrams' current Superman project is still in the works. This, however, is not the first time Abrams has toyed with the character. After the quest for peace in 1987, it was clear to everyone that something needed to change for the Man of Steel on screen. This would have been putting it lightly in terms of J.J. Abrams' Superman Flyby script, as he chopped and changed some of the most sacred parts of Clark Kent's origin. Said script, in which Jor-El would have been Kryptonian royalty and Lex Luthor a CIA agent that could fly, famously leaked onto the internet and was treated with harsh criticism. That being said, however, the movie was put into development, but like so many over the years, suffered in developmental hell thanks to personnel changes and multiple rewrites. Would Flyby have been loyal to Superman's traditional comic book roots? Absolutely not. However, it would have at least taken the Man of Steel in a new direction, something that was sorely needed at the time, and with early noughties megastars like Ashton Kutcher, Brendan Fraser, and even a young Henry Cavill being eyed for the role, this had potential. Number 3. Batman v Superman. Ever since 2016, you hear the words Batman v Superman and you can't help but wince. Everything from the utter waste of Batman's DCEU introduction, the poor story, Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor, and the whole Martha scene are reason enough to want to forget the movie ever happened. But there was a time that fans could have had a much different movie. That's certainly not to say that the Batman v Superman script penned by Akiva Goldsman was anything close to perfect, but there was enough in there to produce something different and at least interesting. The script had its fair share of issues, which is rightfully or wrongfully to be expected coming from the writer of both Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, but let's focus on what would have made this a better movie than what we got in 2016. The story certainly would have been unique to say the least. Middle-aged Batman, played by Colin Farrell no less, had already lost Alfred, Jim Gordon, and Dick Grayson, and eventually saw his wife killed seemingly by the same criminal which Superman, played by Jude Law, had failed to apprehend. Thus began their battle. It's the bones of an admittedly convoluted story, but throw in the fact that the Joker was behind everything and you have the potential for a compelling movie. Who wouldn't have taken the gamble of picking something like this over the hot mess that was Batman v Superman? Number 2. Superman Red Son. The issue that many reboots have, particularly when it comes to the realms of the comic book movie world, is that all too often the same stories are told and retold. That's one thing that would not have been said about Jordan Vogt-Roberts' Superman pitch. Everyone seems to love the death of Superman, but what about Superman Red Son? The essence of the story is simple. Instead of crashing down in the good old US of A, Kal-El touched down in the Soviet Union. While changing the history of Superman can be flirting with fan backlash, this comes straight out of Mark Millar's incredibly popular 2003 miniseries. Like many of the entries on this list, this pitch from the Kong Skull Island director came at a time when the DC ship needed steadying. Vogt-Roberts' idea, however, was to essentially produce Red Son outside of the confines of the DCEU as a completely separate timeline. At the risk of audiences being unprepared for multiple versions of DC characters when the studio seemingly couldn't even get one version right, it would have been worth the potential gain. A completely different view on the Superman mythos, while staying true to the pages of the comics, would have been something that everyone could have agreed on. Number 1. Crisis on Infinite Earths. Even at its very best, the DCEU was a hot mess. Tonally, the franchise has historically been all over the place. Crossovers simply haven't worked, and for a long time, no one knew what was going on with several big characters. At the other end of the spectrum are DC's TV shows, with the Arrowverse boasting multiple popular properties, successfully intertwining with the epitome being the epic Crisis on Infinite Earths event. Had former DC president Walter Hamada had his way, fans could have seen something similar to this on the big screen. The current plan to clean up the DCEU mess before moving into the DCU is to use the Flash, but Hamada's plan was to adapt Crisis on Infinite Earths with Henry Cavill's Superman at the forefront. This could have acted as a soft reboot of sorts, much like how it streamlined several messy timelines in the comics, keeping the popular Man of Steel in the picture. Even if this would have been Cavill's swan song as Superman, before ushering in any other version Warner Brothers wanted to introduce, this would have been far better than bringing him back for a post-credits scene only to clarify that he wouldn't have a role in the franchise moving forward. Could this have been as close to an Infinity War or an Endgame as DC could have hoped for? And as always, please do let us know what you think of our list in the comments down below. And also let us know which is your favorite Superman moment from TV, film, or comics. Oof, shirtless Henry Cavill, anyone? If you want to follow me on socials, I am at Strawn87 on Twitter and on Instagram. Come and say hello to me on there. Thank you for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, take care.